I did not buy that comic book collection. Why did I pass it up? Let's talk about a few different reasons and what it might mean for the hobby. Up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. You know what to do, like, comment, subscribe. You know where to find me. Check out the description for information. Let's get right to it. Part of the reason I want to get right to it is because I've been having computer problems and my recording got all messed up and there was like this weird echo in the recording and I'm having to do it all over again the next day. So anyway, the day after King Con, I had actually somebody that I've dealt with in the past in buying collections reached out to me with another collection. He actually reached out to me earlier in the week with an enormous collection, like a whole U-Haul of long boxes, 100 plus long boxes, which I just would have nowhere to put them. they'd be like sitting in my backyard. Sort of like the Simpsons episode where he finds the sugar on the side of the road. But I didn't have the bandwidth or the physical space to look at that collection. But he said he had another collection. So the day after King Con, I got up early and went over there and took a look at the collection. I'm going to put a picture of the collection up here. Mostly slabs. There were some raw books from the 90s, like some Burn Era Fantastic Four, but they were unbagged and boarded. I looked through. There were like 2 or 3 boxes I looked through quickly. But the bulk of the deal in terms of the dollar value is the slabs. About 280 slabs. And the story was the collector had graded these books like in 2021, 2022. And then medical problems befell him and he was looking to sell the collection. So the problem was it was 2021, 2022. And so there are several issues with this collection that this collection points out. Number one, don't slab everything. I think there was a thought during the comic boom as prices on everything were going bananas that if I grade these books, they're going to have much more value, right? I just grab a random book and I'm going to grade it. It's a good book, Early Rogue, newsstand, right? Dazzler number 22. Let me grade that. Well, first off, this book is decent, but it's, maybe a 9.0. If it was a 9.8, maybe. And that's what people didn't realize. They were grading a lot of stuff. So, and this wasn't an isolated example of what this guy was doing. There were people that were grading a whole ton of things, and it turned out that even at the time, the books weren't worth what they thought they were going to be worth. So you have 280 slabs. Now let's just talk about case costs. $25 a book, nice round number, 280 slabs, $7,000. $7,000 to grade those books. Are those books worth $7,000? Now what was there? I saw Spider-Man #1 newsstand at a 9.6, and that was about the best book I saw. I did a little bit of digging. There were a lot of copies. There had to be at least 8 copies of Beavis and Butthead, all between 9.0 and 9.6. I didn't see any 9.8s. And you could see the boxes there. There were like 10 at a time. There was an X-Men Prime #1, 7.5. There was like a random Action Comics from the 90s, 8.5. There were a lot. The majority of the books were in the 9s, but not many 9.8s. And that Beavis and Butthead book, right? Even in a 9.8 today is maybe on its best day $100. The lower grades in the 9s are going to be in the probably $40, $50 range, maybe $60 for a 9.6. So just grading a book doesn't mean it's going to increase its value. So let's talk about the difference between the value of a graded book and value of a raw book. So 280 slabs essentially means 280 books, right? Maybe more than a long box. Are you paying $7,000 for a long box of comics? Not with the comics that are in here. So probably the value of the books, if you're going to buy that long box, $200, $500, like at a crazy high price, right? All of the value of the slabs, is built into the case costs, the $25. Now, some of them, yes, were $60, $70, $80 books. But the problem is they shouldn't have been graded to begin with. I fell into that trap a little bit, more so with Bronze Age books. And it becomes a supply and demand. For a 90s book, there are a lot of high grade, let's say a lot of books in the 9 or better range for any Marvel, DC, even Image, Dark Horse book, right? There are a few exceptions that are harder to find, but Valiant. Most of those books, you can find high grade raws, right? You go to show, that's what people have. That's, those are recent books, relatively speaking. And a lot of them were well cared for because people got them. They put them in a bag and board, read them once, put them away. They had collectors that were grabbing these books. And so they're not hard to find. You go back into the Bronze Age, and there was a speculation piece associated with this. This particular collection didn't look spec heavy. It just looked like, oh, I have these books. I think they have value. Let me grade them and increase the value. Well, maybe you're taking a $10 book and making it a $30 book, but you're paying $25 to do that. That's the problem. And I was grading, books like Eternals books, and then Ms. Marvel 1, Spider-Woman 1, books that are not hard to find. And I was finding copies that were, 8.85-ish range, 7.5, and submitting them, and they don't have a ton of value. Now, let's move on to the other issue that this particular collection magnifies, which is the falling value of books in general, right? And there's a supply and demand piece on top of this. When you're talking about 90s books, they're plentiful. They are like a Spider-Man 1 is plentiful. An X-Men Prime is not a hard book to find. It might be a hard book to find because no dealer is going to have it at a show because it's not worth anything. And this was a 7.5. I don't know if a 7.5 was ever sold to that book. That's one that jumped out to me as a book that, it's got a foil cover. People are like people were in the, maybe still are, in foil mania all over again. So X-Men Prime #1 in a 9.8 is a $50-ish book. A 7.5. The last sale of a 7.5 was back in February for $20. A 7.5 sold back last September for $12, and one in 2022. In 2022 for $6. Right, so it's like there has to be a reason to get a book graded, and I'm for modern books, and by modern I mean really 80s forward, unless it's a huge key. For keys, minor keys, mid-range keys, you got to get the 9.8. And so this is another issue, and it kind of leads into an issue that affects all comic books and the whole grading procedure. And that is what's being submitted. So I think people who submit books regularly have a threshold. $200. $100, $500, $80. The people that are looking to resell, people that want to preserve it for their personal collection, that's another thing. And listen, if you're a never slabber, that's fine too. But everybody has a different track. But I'm talking about people that are submitting books to grading companies, specifically CGC. That there's a cutoff. Let's say your cutoff is $200, right? $150. I'll go mid-range. And so you might do the pre-screen. You might look at a book and think that it's a 9.8. Say, yeah, I'm going to submit that and hope I get the 9.8. I'm going to try to not misspeak and say 9.9 pre-screen. That's been so battered into my head for the last several weeks that I was kind of doing it reflexively. But if you do a 9.8 pre-screen, maybe it makes sense. But here's the thing, right? During the pandemic and the comic boom, CGC was backlogged. It took me over a year to get a vintage order back. And CGC hired more employees, and then the grading process went more quickly. But here's the thing. Because the value of comic books in general has decreased in the last 2 years, if your threshold was $200 and you put books, let's say, away and, kind of forgot about them, you found a short box of books, let's say 125 books, that would be 5 orders, 125 books that you say that you had put away in July of 2022, and then you discovered them. These were books I was going to get graded. I was going to send it to a presser, and they got stacked under something else. I got 125 books in here I was going to get graded because I thought that, for the most part, they would be $200 or more. You have a lot of books, let's say. You're going to do some 9.8 pre-screens, etc. How many of those 125 books are still worth $200 in the grade that you think you were going to get from them? 50? I don't know the exact numbers, but it's less than 125 for certain, right? So now, maybe you look through the box and you check prices and take a closer look at editions, and you send 50 of those 125 books to your presser because you think they're going to be worth, they will be worth $200 or more. That's 40% of what you might have submitted 2 years ago. Now, this particular collection, the collector submitted everything. And people have learned their lesson. I think people who, had thrown money, had used that business model, didn't work out so well for them, over the last couple of years. Maybe if they were lucky and they were able to move those books at the time, they could have gotten out okay. But now, this leads me to my next point. How many books is CGC grading compared to the number that they were grading 2 years ago? It's less. It has to be less. People are still grading new books, but I think even then they're more discerning. Especially dealers, people who, would send 25 copies of the same book out. They have to be more discerning in what they're sending out. And I did a quick analysis because you can look at the cert numbers, right? So the cert numbers give us information in terms of, what CGC has graded. So essentially they started grading, early 2000s? Let's say 2000, just as a ballpark number, right? So, I found a cert number. What's the earliest cert number I found? 0124, yada, 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 from April of 2004. It took CGC until about 2010 for the first digit on the cert number to go from 0 to 1, right? So it took almost a decade. And then to go to 2002, we're talking to go to a 2, the first digit of the cert number. Now, it's not a 1-to-1, right? because it depends on the order, how many books are in the order. It's not a one-to-one, but I have to figure that there is a relationship there. So they started off with the leading digit of 0. The leading digit of 1 in 2010. The leading digit of 2 first appeared around 2018. And then 3 sometime in, I believe, 2020. Right? And then 4 sometime in, I believe, 2021 or 2022. And we're still in the low 4s, right? I think brand new books are like, the first 3 digits are like 438, maybe 440. We're not even halfway to the 5s. So we went from 2000, 2010, 2018, 2020, 2022, and it's going to be a few more years. The pace of books, the pace at which they're grading or having books submitted, I think, has to have cooled down quite a bit since 2021. So what does that mean? I mean, CGC is making less money, right? So if the collector that found that box of 125 books says, I'm only going to submit 50 of them, that's a 60% cut in the number of books that are being submitted. Now, I'm just using rough numbers and kind of guesstimating based on limited data. But man, it only makes sense to me that they're grading a lot less books than they did 2 years ago. Now, they have expanded. They're not grading pulps, and maybe they'll be grading manga, but still, they were bought out because the owners knew that they're never going to see these sales again. And pandemic has had that effect in many different areas, right? I'm a high school teacher, right? And our graduation rate is connected in part to how students perform on state tests. Well, state tests were canceled for 2+ years. And there were, in New York State, there was a potential for an appeal. Students could get a lower grade on those exams and still get credit for it. So during the pandemic, students just had to essentially show participation, right? So graduation rates have gone up in schools that struggle with that kind of thing, but it's a bubble, right? And that's what CGC was seeing all these books submitted. It was a bubble, just like the prices, right? The prices went up and then they came down, and now they're leveling off to what they were. And maybe the rate at which books are being submitted to CGC is similar to the rate that they were being submitted in 2018, 2019. Maybe it's a little bit better, only because I think there's been more awareness about CGC within the community and more people getting involved. Now, people jumped in during the height of the market, may have jumped out. And that leads to another thing. So CGC, right? That 125 books they have in the box came from their personal collection, right? CGC makes their money on the big books, right? So if you have a collector that has FF1, Amazing Fantasy 15, maybe even a Golden Age key or 2, they have big boy books. That's the first thing they're going to submit, especially if they want to liquidate their collection, right? You're going to submit the big books. And how many of those big books are still left ungraded? Now, CGC is hoping, I think they have to love the idea of CPR. Crack, press, and resubmit. And there have been plenty of channels that have talked about the older CGC labels and looking at the books to see if they are CPR candidates, if they were never cleaned or pressed, if they have pressable defects. And there is a potential monetary gain to that, and there is a fun to it. I mean, I had gotten bought a slab copy of Flash 110 that was shipped exceedingly poorly. First appearance of Kid Flash and also first Weather Wizard. Shipped in a bubble mailer. The slab didn't survive the trip in the bubble mailer. The book was fine, and so it was already cracked, and when I looked at the book more closely, it could benefit from a clean and a press. And I actually have done that with that book, and will at some point in the near future be submitting it to CGC. And I'd be interested to see if I do get a grade bump, because the book had just been submitted. It was a 4.0. It had its flaws, but there were some, definitely could use a cleaning, and definitely some dimpling and stuff, that could be improved. So in addition to the fewer books being submitted, there is I'm trying to think of the correct term. What is the term? Basically, as populations in the wild of animals increase, they can only increase based on the resources. And there comes a point in time where there are more animals than there are resources for them, and then the population levels off. So what are the resources? The CGC's resources in that regard are raw comic books. Every month, the major titles are printing more raw comic books, and they're printing foils and exclusives, et cetera, store exclusives. And those people are submitting it and graded. But for the older books, there's a finite amount of submittable comic books there. Now, during the boom, when the values of the comic books were increasing, more books would meet the threshold that someone would have to think, yeah, I should submit this book. At an 8.5, it's still going to have value. Maybe it doesn't have that value anymore. Now, over time, maybe. But how is CGC feeding the bottom line if the number of books being submitted has decreased? And the number of high-value books, or unlimited value books in their terminology, being submitted decreases because there are fewer of them out there. Okay. Now, granted, there are raw collectors, and there are folks who will crack books out of the case because they prefer them raw. They'll buy them. You buy them online. I did it with a book recently. I bought it online, slabbed, and I took the extra step to say, is it a CPR candidate? It was an Airboy from 1946 and a 5.5. I'm not going to lose. I got a great deal on it. I got it for a better price than I thought what I could get a raw book for. And I cracked it out. If you get the slabs right, you know, and you're a raw collector. I've gone to shows where they have high value books. At Baltimore, somebody had a first elongated man I was interested in. They had the CGC label in the back of the bag because they had cracked it out and had it raw. And the other thing that's happened in the last couple of years, the difference for those kinds of books between raw and graded has diminished, right? Essentially, what I do when I'm pricing a raw book is I look at what grade I think it is, and then, because you have better data that way, look at the value of the book graded. Okay, so let's say it's a vintage book that's worth $500 graded, right? Take away grading and pressing and cleaning fees, now $450, $425 is what the book would be worth, right? Because if you do put, and there is that element of risk, and that's something that I think some comic book collectors and buyers and sellers enjoy, the little bit of gambling aspect to it. That's what CPR is too. Can I perform the work on this and bump it up? And if you're proficient at it, and you know which books to choose, and you're successful much more often than you're unsuccessful, it probably is. There is a cost-benefit analysis to it. There is, you're going to make money if you can do it well. If you can bump a book up a grade or two, sure. So what does this all mean, right? And there's one other point I wanted to make. So I passed on the collection because I thought the slabs were going to be exceedingly difficult to move, right? If you have decent books, I'm talking about modern books, 90s, let's say, in 9.8s, there's a market for that, right? There are people that will collect a run. They want to be on the CGC registry of a particular title, especially if it's a popular title. yeah, maybe you can move those books. But when you start to get like, 97.5, it's hard to find the collector that's going to want that, right? And there's another aspect to it. And I've said this before on the channel. I'm always of kind of two minds of this, right? I enjoy reading comic books. And the older the book, the more I enjoy that experience as opposed to looking at it online or even in a facsimile. Because there's something about interacting with the ads, the letters pages, the bullpen bulletins, the direct currents, whatever it is, and also the tactile aspect to it, taking you back. There are times where I will read a comic book and part of me is transported back to, my childhood bedroom or the living room, in my house growing up, and having that experience. That happened to me in reading Batman 251. I had that book as a kid. I was 6 years old again. There was that nostalgia to it. You don't get the same kind of experience, the same hit when you are reading a facsimile, and certainly when you're looking at it online. You're like, oh, that's a cool story, yeah, but there's something, about it being there. That's for me. Others may have a different opinion. But the other thing, too, is as you get older, and this happened as I started to go through my collection, you realize, okay, let's say you only have 1,000 comic books in your collection. You're collecting keys. Are you going to read them all again? And as the number of books in your personal collection increases, the probability of you reading any fraction of them decreases. But I also get some satisfaction out of going through a run of books. I'll be like, oh, I collected this title. There were 50 issues, and I have all 50 of them. And you can, having grown up with that title, there is a nostalgia in seeing how the trade dress might change, or the logo for Marvel or DC, the Marvel Comics Group banner on the top, and the Marvel box on the side, or the way the price is displayed. That brings up something about being at that point in time, right? There is something just cool about that I enjoy, going through, a run of books. And there's something, and I believe there are quite a few comic book collectors that have some level of OCD. You got to have every issue. And there is a satisfaction you arrive in that. But then it's like, what do I do with the books then? Right? That's the eternal question. Is what am I doing with these? I enjoy collecting, I enjoy having them, and I enjoy reading them, and I enjoy flipping through them. But in the long term, I'm not going to read them again. Right? There are certain ones, yes, I'd love to return to read them again. But you don't have the time. So let's go back to the one other thing about this collection, right? If I bought the collection at the price that he was willing to drop it to, could I have made a profit? Probably. Right? I wanted more, certainly, and I wanted to, have the potential to double up. And I'm going to say one other thing about Slabs. They're heavy. They're heavy to carry to conventions. They're bulky to store in your house, and they cost a lot more to ship when you sell them online or buy them online. Right? If somebody buys a book raw online for $15, they pay $5 shipping. If the book is an 8.5 for $80, they're paying $15 shipping. Right? So they're harder to sell from that aspect because the consumer somebody has to pay the shipping on the darn thing, or you have to lug these big, heavy, and usually I'm in plastic bins, boxes, a whole box that holds 25 books instead of a short box that holds 125. They're difficult. They're difficult to sell from that regard as well. So would I be able to move them? It would have been a grind. Right? Maybe I have a Whatnot show, start everything at $1 just to blow them out. If I had gotten them for almost nothing, right? If I had them as a larger part of a collection and the collection already profited, maybe I'm just like, okay, I'll blow these out. Anybody that wants them can take them. Right? But as a standalone to try to get your money back and then make some money for the effort you put in. And then I don't know how many of those I would want. Maybe there were some 9/8s that I really wanted, but it didn't seem like those were there. So there, there's that sweat equity put in, and it's opportunity cost. If I spend money on that collection, I have to really grind through the collection. If another collection comes up, I'd rather have the available cash to buy a collection that I want more, for whatever reason. There's more profit margin. There are books in there that I want. It's just a cool thing to have. It'll bring people to Whatnot because that's where I sell. Any of those reasons, right? So, again, I passed on the collection. And sometimes when you're buying comic books, whether you're just buying from a dealer at a show, looking at eBay, bidding on Whatnot, or looking at a collection, there's a time where you have to be, I'm not going to buy that. I'm going to pass. I'm going to spend my money elsewhere or save it. Okay? So that's my long-winded analysis of why I did not buy that collection. I'd like to thank you for stopping by and taking the time to look at my ramblings about comic books. You can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.